Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries RPG podcast with John and Hannah.
Hi.
And we know it's been a hot minute, unfortunately, due to some minor health issues, but we're back, and this week we're going to be looking at that bat-winged terror, the Vargouilles. Okay, so I can see there, love, you've got the AD&D First Edition Monster Manual 2. So what does that say about the Vargouilles?
So, we've got a fairly nice picture of a head with bat wings sticking out by its ears and tentacles sticking around where its neck would be.
Yeah, that is pretty sweet, and it reminds me of some of the old, like, black and white art in the old, like, comics of, like, you know, like suspense and horror comics that were sort of big before the, like, superhero comics took off. I really quite like that piece of artwork.
Yep. And then we've got a paragraph telling us that they come from Tartarus and appear on the prime material plane to wreak havoc. Hideous flying heads with writhing tentacles appear at dusk and are gone by dawn. They lair in caves and caverns, and they hate light. They attack and extinguish torches or smash lanterns, and they avoid daylight. It blinds them.
Okay.
They're feared because their bite is so destructive that hit points are actually lost forever unless a saving throw versus poison is successfully made for each bite inflicted.
That's pretty dangerous.
That's 1d4 hit points lost and not restorable by any means short of a wish. They've got infravision, ultravision, and their treasure is incidental.
Yeah, because I expect it's just like bits and pieces lying around from people they've killed, rather than them actually having treasure.
It specifically says if one of their victims had an item of value, then it's probably on the floor of their lair.
Alright, okay, cool. Well, the next time that they appear is in the Second Ed Monstrous Compendium Planescape Appendix, and the stats are pretty much the same, to be honest, as we'd expect. We get some additional description. They've got glowing green eyes, which you can see there on the lovely Tony DiTellesi artwork, which I'm a massive fan of, as I'm sure listeners to the show will know. They've got that shriek that can paralyse people who fail a saving throw. They've got infravision. They still cause the permanent hit point loss as described previously, although there's various spells that can now sort of mitigate that a little bit. So it's been toned down a bit, but it's still pretty dangerous. They also now gain the Vargouilles Kiss, where if they get a paralysed victim, they can effectively do this kiss on them that transforms the affected person into a Vargouille within 1d6 hours.
And that's something that makes them much more dangerous as a monster concept, because now you know how you get more of them, and it's possible for one of them to create 100 more in a single night if it wanted to.
Yeah, I also think for me as well, it sort of taps into that whole like body horror vibe. So if you think of that bit where the like in The Thing, where there's the guy where his head comes off and it turns into like the spider, it describes like once you've done this Vargouilles kiss on somebody, like when the final stages are reached, their sort of head breaks away and turns into this creature and flies off. So I think it leans on that sort of horror element quite a lot.
Very much.
And it says in here that this is the method by which they've spread throughout the multiverse, infecting other people. We're told in here, we get a bit more background. We're told that they're rumoured to be the creation of a wizard called Roz Vanki, who eventually achieved lichdom. And again, I've made a note here, quality artwork, because I love that picture there. I think it's classic.
I think of all of them, that's probably the least creepy, but also the most what I pictured the creature actually being.
Yeah.
It's got a sort of a Labyrinth Goblins kind of a vibe to it that really works.
Yeah, and I mean, I know for myself that having like had this like Planescape appendix, that this was the first sort of encounter I had with them. So that artwork really sort of sold me on that.
And so going from there, we're on to Third Ed. And the shocking mess that is the third ed artwork. Do you want to comment on that before we go on?
Yeah, thank you for letting me get my rant out of the way before we delve into that third ed. Now, looking at the artwork on here, it just looks weird to me. It looks almost like something you'd come across in like an old like first-person shooter, you know, where it's like, oh, it's a bit of a skull, but it's all like dull brown, and it's still got the green eyes, but they don't really look alive. It looks just like very artificial, like an old sort of computer graphic, you know.
I think the reason it invokes that computer graphic element is because I don't think the wings were originally part of that head. I don't think this originally was a Vargouille, because if you look, it's got ears. Yeah. As well as the wings. So these wings haven't grown out of these ears.
Yeah.
I think maybe this was a Medusa head or something. And then these were dragon wings. And they've gone, oh no, we haven't got a picture for the Vargouille. Quick, Photoshop!
Yeah,
cut, paste!
It looks overly worked digitally to me. And I can see that they're trying to make it look a bit more demonic, maybe. But in a way, it looks less like a flying head, and that was the horrifying thing to me, you know. You could become one of these creatures, whereas that doesn't look anything like a human to me.
The head itself doesn't look alive. It looks like a statue head somehow.
Yeah, there's no sort of like... It's not animated, is it? It's very static.
But anyway...
Yeah, let's move on from us rubbishing the artwork. So like I say, we don't like it. But tell me about the Varg Whales.
Apologies to whoever worked so very hard on the third ed monster manual, because we do slag you off quite a lot. But yeah, the artwork was left a bit wanting there.
But yeah,
from our point of view.
Enough of rubbishing the artwork. Tell us what the Varg Whales like in D&D 3.5.
So they're now from Carcerai rather than Tartarus.
So still from the outer planes.
But yeah, around a bit. You know, one of them gribbly hell places. They haunt graveyards, ruins, other places of death and decay. So, death places rather than dark places.
Yeah.
Slightly larger than human head. Has a wingspan of 4 feet. Speaks infernal. And then we go on to the combat attacks. We have a shriek attack, which allows them to paralyse people.
Yep.
We have the kiss attack, which goes into quite a bit of detail about how the transformation occurs.
Yeah, they were quite big on sort of like describing how diseases progressed in like 3.5.
And then we also have the poison. So the kiss attack, if you've been paralysed, they can come over and kiss you. You get a DC 15 fortitude save. You fail that, you roll a D6. For that many hours, like D6 hours, that's how long it takes for your hair to fall out.
Yeah.
Another D6, that's how long it takes for your ears to grow into wings and for tentacles to start sprouting on your scalp and your chin. So you're not dead yet, and your mates have probably got a very good idea of what's going on by now.
Yeah.
And this could be anywhere between 2 and 12 hours of gameplay. Next 6 hours, you take an intelligence drain and a charisma drain. 1 point per hour to a minimum of 3. 1 more D6, that's how many hours you've got before your head drops off and you're completely a Vargouille.
So yeah, I mean, I suppose it works in both ways in that sense, because I like it because it gives you a chance to build on that suspense, and you know, oh, we've got to do something about it, we can see it going on, rather than just like, boom, you've turned into a Vargouille. But also as well, to my mind, it makes it seem less dangerous because you've got a lot more time to like deal with it.
I don't know, because you've effectively got between 4 and 24 hours, and you don't know how long you've got between each of those.
I suppose, yeah, the uncertainty factor is an interesting
one. Just because the first phase took 6 hours doesn't mean the next 3 phases aren't only going to take an hour each. So you still got to get your move on. that's going to be one where whether or not the GM tells you how long this phase is going to take is going to have a big effect on how the players react to it.
I do like the fact...
you're going to have to tailor it to your group.
I do like the fact with the different stages, at least you'll be able to see it's progressing. So obviously, like, your hair drops out, then you sprout the back wings, you'll be like, oh, right, it's kicking up a notch, but even if you don't know exactly how long. Okay, so anything else about the...
So also, this transformation is interrupted by sunlight. So, again, you get bitten right at the start of the night. You might be transformed before midnight.
Yeah.
You get bitten at the end of the night. It might be a whole day and you might be, like, 20 miles down the road before you've even realised it's started to affect, because you've just been walking in the sun all day.
However, if you've got a handy mage, you can cast like a daylight spell on like a pebble or a light spell on a pebble or whatever, and you keep that next to you.
And it does mention this. It's interrupted by this, but it does not reverse it.
So that's just a way of like delaying it while you find a more permanent solution.
Yeah, every second that you're away from your magic pebble is a problem, and it's going to presumably be quite difficult to keep your whole head in the light of a single magic pebble at any point. You can reverse the transformation with the remove disease spell, and the save is the save DC is Constitution based and includes a +4 racial bonus.
Tell you one other thing I did notice about him in 3.5 is the sort of permanent hit point loss. They still sort of have it, but healing spells now like completely cure it. Whereas in the previous versions, in first edition, you couldn't get them back unless you got a wish spell. That was it. In second ed, it was like you can heal a little bit back with healing, but that's it. Whereas in this, it's like one healing spell, boom, it's all back. You're cured. So that's been sort of lessened a great deal.
I think it's because they are leaning more into that body horror aspect of it, particularly as from a player's point of view of having somebody turning into the monster.
Yeah.
And there wouldn't be all that detail there if they weren't expecting you to use it.
Fair enough. Okay, so the next appearance of them is in the 5th edition Volo's Guide to Monsters, which I can see you've got there, love. So why don't you tell us a bit what they're like in 5th edition?
So, I don't particularly like or dislike this artwork.
It's just a bit generic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just like float.
It's nice enough. It does exactly what it needs to. It shows you the monster as it needs
I like the fact that floating heads look a bit like different people's heads. Which makes you think of the transformation, you know.
Yeah, it's nice to see more than one of them, and then the one at the back that I'm not sure whether that's supposed to be an orc or something, or whether it's supposed to be one that's been a Vargouille for longer, so it's lost all its hair, and... Anyway.
So what does it say about the Varg Whales then?
Again, we get the description. It's a head with wings where the ears would be.
Yep.
No mention of tentacles in this description.
And in the artwork, they've just got normal hair.
Yeah, they have got a couple of little wiggly tentacles like round their chin, but not much. They're described as abyssal nuisances that hang around in the caves and skies in the abyss. The demons don't really bother about them unless they're there in massive numbers, because there's not really much they can do to anything else in the abyss. And they tend to sort of scavenge other creatures' kills.
So they're more like pests and nuisances, like you say, rather than anything really dangerous to the other inhabitants of the abyss.
Next section is called The World Awaits, and describes how they might hitchhike along when somebody summons a demon.
Yeah.
Because demon summoners rarely think to take precautions against this. So I mean, you can picture this now, can't you? You've got your sort of 12th level mage, thinks he's Billy Biggins, summons a demon to do his bidding, and unbeknownst to him, off flaps a Vargouille through the sky to the next village over.
Yeah, I quite like the fact that it seems to suggest when it's talking about that they're almost like, might be like sort of like ticks or parasites on other demons. And I quite like that because it sort of suggests a larger like ecology for like demons, rather than just like, oh, we're demons, we knock around in the lower plane like destroying stuff and being evil until we get summoned. It suggests that like there's other types of creatures as parasites and animals and stuff like that are native to the Abyss, which I think's, it sort of hints at a larger sort of world, which I quite like.
Okay, and then something that I noticed when I was reading through this earlier that sort of made my brain itch. We've got one section here about ghastly reproduction that describes the Vargouille's kiss turning a humanoid into a Vargouille. And then we've got the box out, as we always do.
Yeah, stat block.
And about a quarter of that box out is taken out by another description of the kiss that includes a lot of the same information.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like a waste of space.
I think we sort of see that a bit in 5th edition where, like, because they tried to put every monster on a second page, and I think there was just some monsters where they didn't really have enough text to sort of like justify it.
Make your pictures bigger. Don't repeat yourselves. There's no point.
I mean, you see the same with like the various like quotes from like Elminster and Volo and stuff like that that are basically just jammed in whenever they've like got a bit of space to fill. I tell you what, I did find unsettling though in the 5th edition one, because it seemed to me that it hinted that they retained some of their knowledge, or if not their personality, from their prior existence, since it says in there that they can retain languages from before they became a Vargouille, even though they can't speak. Now, if you retain a language from before your transformation, that suggests to me that some part of them exists, which makes sense because their brain's in the head and the head is the bit that survives. But it sort of makes me wonder, like, what happens to the person's personality and how much of that person actually continues to exist after they're transformed.
Well, yeah, it's definitely a gruesome end for a character.
Yeah.
If they end up as one of these things.
I mean, we know with like things like vampires and stuff like that, part of the horror is like they're sort of like the person they used to be, but they get all these weird like conflicting urges and like hungers that make them into something different and horrifying. And I could see very much like the Vargouille sort of like going the same way. You know, so there's that horror, like say if one of your player party gets turned into one and you get some vague hints that like there's still some bit of them in there, but they're now this flapping like predatory abyssal creature. So I think they could be a great in a horror game, I think.
Oh, absolutely. So, you know we're going to hear about it if we don't look them up in Pathfinder. Are
That's
they in
right.
there?
They are indeed in Pathfinder, and check out that sweet artwork. It looks bog all like a human head, but that if you're going to make a head look like fiendish with wings, that's how you do it. And although I'm not a mad fan of like Pathfinder 1st edition, I have got to say that like the artwork in the bestiaries is consistently like top banana, to the point where like if I'm looking for inspiration for a D&D-esque monster, I genuinely look for the Pathfinder artwork first of all, just because the consistency is far better. Okay, so in terms of the actual stats, it's still got the shriek, it's got the poison, it's got the kiss. Again, the kiss transformation takes quite a long time. It's got multiple stages, like 3.5, so you've got more time to reverse and delay it. But as you were saying, love, it sort of drags out that sort of horrifying transformation. The poison, however, is more reminiscent of the 1st edition permanent hit point damage. And basically it prevents healing of this damage by magic unless the caster can make a DC 20 caster check. So you can still heal it with magic, but you've got to make a check to do so. Varg Whales are described in the Pathfinder Bestiary as being larger than a human head, typically between 12 and 20 inches high, with a wingspan of 15 to 35 inches. And I've got a note here to remind myself that the artwork in this book is quality, which it is. They're fiendish creatures who often haunt battlefields or anywhere death and decay can be found. So sort of a bit like the sort of 3.5 version. They attack in flocks. They have this hideous method of reproduction, which is obviously the Vargouilles kiss. And that and the relative ease with which they can be summoned to the material plane, as it describes in here, makes them a threat, because you can summon a handful of them, and if they can get their hands on not literally their hands because they ain't bloody got any, but if they can get their lips on a village of poor peasants, you could quickly have a massive flock of Vargouilles, and the more you've got, the more they can turn into Vargouilles, and pretty soon you could be looking at a massive plague of them, basically.
So, here's a question for you.
Okay.
We're talking about heads.
Yep.
And we can assume that this creature needs a head of a specific sort of a size.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's wrong with a cow's head? Or rather, I suppose what I'm asking is, does the creature need to be of a particular size, of a particular intelligence? Does it need to be a creature with a soul, so to speak? Now,
obviously, you're free to do whatever you want with your own setting, but I would say no. I mean, we know from certain undead mainly monsters that can transform people. There's quite a lot of them where it says they specifically need a humanoid, and it says that, whereas this doesn't specify at all. So I would assume any creature with a head is fair game. And I can't think of anything more scary than some demonic cow head with bat wings coming at me out of the darkness.
Except the fact that you know that there's a herd of about 500 head of cattle out there.
Yeah, and I mean, if we look at the Pathfinder stats, for instance, just because Pathfinder provides attributes for monsters, and we can see it's only got intelligence 5, so it can't speak. It sort of understands languages it knew in life, but I get the feeling from the description of its behaviour in various books that it mainly sort of acts on predatory instinct, which obviously humans and demi-humans have got sort of buried deep down, but animals have got nearer to the surface anyway.
So I suppose what I'm getting at here really is that even though we've already talked a bit about how you could use this with a player character, how you could use it with a lot of body horror or drama to utterly destroy a character, you can also still use this monster and make it completely terrifying and just have it attacking animals and not worry about all the sort of emotional drama of it if you wanted to use it as a silly monster.
Oh yeah, and I mean, let's face it, you could do the old, I can imagine the scene, you're a group of adventurers, you're rocked into this village, or there's a bit of a commotion going on. Old Farmer Joskins is someone's been killing all my cows. He's found all of his cows with their heads missing. Someone's chopped the heads off my cows. So you're looking around for a vandal or an evil cult or whatever. Turns out it's a Vargouille. But now it's got a herd of cowhead Vargouilles with it as well. So I think that'd be pretty cool as a sort of little encounter. If you say if you wanted to just sort of use it as less of a sort of body horror, it's just a monster, you wanted a bit less moral ambiguity, you could do that. You could easily say, oh yeah, it's ravaged the local livestock and converted all them into Vargouilles, and you could do it like that.
And obviously from that tracks all the various things that you could do with this with whatever local livestock or other monsters you've got in your game.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens if one of these bites a dragon? I know the dragon's going to have some dirty saving throws against it, but what if it fails a load of them?
It does raise an interesting sort of point, though. Because obviously we assume that the Vargouille you sort of get the stats for is your generic sort of human, demi-human head. It does raise the interesting idea, though, if a Vargouille was created from a dragon, would it still have a breath weapon? Because, strictly speaking, that's not really physically possible, is it? It's magical.
Now, I know we got some anatomical drawings in 3rd Ed.
Oh, in the Draconomicon.
But I can't remember whether the fire-breathing mechanism was above or below the jawline. I know it was somewhere there in the back of the throat. But I suppose it'd depend on whether or not they retained that mechanism when it changed. And I mean, would it just change with the Vargouille?
And I mean, to be fair, they're obviously magical creatures because they're fiendish for a start. And also, we know that, like, physically speaking, given the size of them, a giant head with 2 little bat wings wouldn't really be able to fly. So, does the magic enable that, in the same way they can retain their languages, does the magic let them retain some other abilities? So it's an interesting to ponder. Obviously, you could do what you want with it in your campaign, but it makes me think of the old like template monsters they introduced in 3.5.
Yeah, very much.
And I could easily see, I mean, obviously you'd have to like work one out yourself, but like making like a Varg Wheel template and perhaps having like the big boss Varg Wheels, like some big dragon head or like purple worm head or something like that.
I don't know, I think you wouldn't really need a template as such. You could just add 1 or 2 powers onto whatever you've got there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And maybe for like weaker creatures, like the example cows, take a hit dice off it.
I mean, I think to be fair,
you need to spend hours messing about with templates.
If I was going to sort of freeball it, which is probably what I'd do, because I'd like, I wouldn't be going to the whole length of making a template because I don't really like play 3.5. All I'd do is I'd just take the basic stats of a Vargouille. If it's like some like double hard, like armoured up enemy like a dragon, give it a bit of extra armour class. Then maybe, like you say, look through its abilities and pick 1, 2 abilities. And then just like bump its XP up a bit and there you go.
You certainly wouldn't want to give it all of the abilities of whatever its previous creature was, because it's already got some dirty powers with the kiss and the paralysing shriek.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting power that we've not really talked about as well.
The shriek.
Yeah.
I think it's one of those powers I found a bit troublesome, and Colin from Spike Pit did a whole big thing about this where he's talking about sort of mechanics that basically mean people are excluded from the game. Because obviously if you get like paralysed by that, effectively you can't do anything while you're paralysed. So I'm a bit on the fence with sort of paralysation effects, because whilst I can see, oh yeah, they represent a dangerous threat and stuff like that, you want to avoid it, obviously. I could see how if it was like a long-term paralysis and you got hit by it at the start of a battle and then you're like, right, I've basically got to sit here doing nothing for the battle, that could be quite boring.
Yeah, I think it's something that, you know, it's to do with how your GM handles it, how the scene plays out, but it's something that could be quite an interesting thing to use sort of from a GM point of view.
Yeah, and I mean,
just sort of go, hey, let's just freeze this scene for a moment and I'm going to tell you all about how horrific it is because everybody's character's just frozen in space for the next 8 seconds and here's what you see. I can see how you could build up a lot of drama with that, and then when they're released, they've had a couple of moments to think about what's going on. They've had, you know, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, it can be, I think probably that's one of its most dangerous powers, the paralysis, even though we've not talked about it. Because, I mean, to hark back to, like, one of my old, like, Rosa Westhaven, like, Midlands games I ran, one of the campaigns for that ended after the players had fought their way through like this whole dungeon. There were like loads of undead in there, and I spent ages being like, oh, these wights and these like ghosts and whatever, are they going to be like a bit difficult for the players? And they romped through all of that without worry. However, at the end, I'd just thrown like a couple of ghouls in, because I was like, oh yeah, they're just like the bin men of the dungeon effectively. They eat all the like the rubbish and the bodies of people that the undead kill. And the player character just got really unlucky. All but one of them failed their saving throws. The one who didn't fail the save was a rogue, and he was like, forget this, I'm off. And all the rest of the player characters just got eaten while they were stood there by the ghouls, and that was pretty much the end of the campaign. So I think paralysis can be quite a dangerous thing if you're not careful.
Yeah. Yeah, paralysis, handle with care.
Yeah. I tell you what, I do also think as well is if we go back to the horror element, I do think a good thing. Obviously, a lot of people are sort of bothered by the idea of like flocks of bats and stuff like that, like flying around them. I can only imagine how much more horrifying it'd be if like the bats were like people's faces floating around you. That'd be. I mean, I'm not bothered about bats. That's grand. But if there was a lot of people's faces floating around me, I'd probably be a little bit less calm about it.
I'm trying to remember what anime it is that I've seen a creature like this in. One of those like 80s movies that I used to have on a VHS. There were about 6 of them. One of them was Laughing Target, but I don't think it was that.
Don't know. If anyone out there's listening and you remember an anime with like a floaty bat-winged head in it, call in and let us know. And I think that's probably about it for this episode.
Yeah.
Like I say, sorry it's taken us a while to get this out. Minor health problems aside, hopefully we can get back to a normal schedule now. We hope you've enjoyed this. If you want to get in touch with us, maybe to talk about the Vargouilles, maybe you can remember that anime that Hannah's talking about from the 80s. Maybe you've got a suggestion for other things you'd like to say, or you'd just like a chat. Either way, you can get in touch with us a couple of different ways. There is the SpeakPipe website, which there'll be a link to in the description of the show. Or if you're having trouble with that, we've also still got our old Anchor account open, which you can leave a voicemail message on. Again, link to that below. Or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Until we see you next time, take care, stay safe, and whenever you're playing, have fun.
Bye.